Well, good evening, Brennan, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337, and our lockdown lecture series. This is meeting number 52. There was some debate last week, is this the anniversary, but we did have a few weekend meetings and a couple of additional meetings at the early part of last year's lockdown. And we're very much looking forward to the actual one-year anniversary on the 23rd of March, which will be a year to the actual date because our first meeting was on Sunday, the 23rd of March, 2020. We do have a very special guest speaker that evening, Brennan. We're having a little teaser quiz on the Facebook page to see who can be the first one to guess who it is. No one so far has got it from the clues that have been posed. So keep on guessing, Brennan. Brennan, as usual, can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines on using Zoom meetings? Please keep your video on and a recognisable name within the screen. That is very much appreciated. It keeps me out of trouble with the Information and Comms Committee. Can I also ask you please to sign the virtual tile on our Facebook page so we've got a record for posterity going forward in the years ahead. Brennan, this evening I'm delighted to welcome back a good friend of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, Brother John Belton, a Master Mason of Lodge Ellangowan. So he's one of us, Brennan, but he's done a lot of his masonry down south. John is a pioneering Masonic researcher, and he was at the infancy of the Internet Lodge 20 odd years ago under the United Grand Lodge of England. So he has very much been at the cutting edge of new technology within Freemasonry. And we've asked him along this evening to talk about a brother who I believe has made such a huge moral impact on the ethos of Freemasonry with some of his books. And I look forward to Brother John Belton introducing us to Joseph Fort Newton and also talking to us about probably or arguably one of the greatest ever Scottish Freemasons, A S MacBride. With that introduction, John, can I hand over to you and the floor is yours.
Right. Share screen. Where are we? Bloody hell, I'm just trying to find the right thing. Sorry, I've got the right bit. Let's get there. Right, F5 and we're away. Right, I'm going to occupy your minds for about half an hour. I didn't start out ever looking for what Joseph Fort Newton did when he came to England in World War I. I was sitting down looking for papers written by another brother, an English brother, who was one of the contributors to The Builder, which was the magazine that Fort Newton started in 1911 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. But I found this, and it's a diary of fellowship, and the dates looked as though they might be interesting. So it ran to 16 episodes, so there's 50,000 words that he wrote on this. And there's the guy we're talking about. How old was he then? Well, he was 28 when he got to Cedar Rapids. His diary of fellowship leaves us with a truly vivid picture of his experiences when he got to London. And there were I discovered many things about the First World War that I didn't know, and I guess some of you will not have known either. But above all, it's his experiences he records that really made Newton tick for me, whether as a pastor, as a citizen of the world. To revisit his times in Britain a century ago reminds us of shared adversity and loss. He came to Britain 2 years into the war, but as a stranger to it. He saw what had been normal become normal for the people of Britain with a special sharpness and a clarity. And that's how he recorded it. So this is real, genuine, contemporaneous oral history. He kept a diary. He was born in Texas, son of a Baptist minister and a lawyer. And when he decided he wanted to take the cloth, he trained at the Southern Baptist Seminary in Kentucky. And he settled in Cedar Rapids. But before that, in 1908, the family were living in Dixon, Illinois, and expecting the birth of their first child. It arrived in the midst of a wild storm, but was stillborn. But also around that time, Newton had accepted an invitation from a church in Cedar Rapids. They left the sadness behind them, and Newton took up the job of rejuvenating the Universalist church there. As Newton said, I changed it from top to bottom, put it on a new basis, named it the Liberal Christian Church, and it later became known as the Little Brick Church. Then he was aged 28. Cedar Rapids, I hear you say. Where's that? I'll tell you, it's in the Midwest in Iowa. And if you want a brand to put to it, the Quaker Oats had a big facility there.
John, can I just stop you a second? I don't think your PowerPoint's working, mate. It's on page 11, it says.
I'm seeing the right picture.
We're only seeing words.
Ah, okay.
I thought Gordon's got a problem his end. I thought I'd let you know.
Let's have a look.
Can you hear me now, John? We're only seeing your Word document. We're not seeing the presentation.
Well, you won't see the Word document anymore. What can you see now? Oh, it's stopped.
We're back to the main screen. So if you share again with your PowerPoint, please. Thank you.
There we are. What can you see now?
That's just coming up. That's your PowerPoint on slide 3. And if you go to slideshow, John, that should work.
1, 2. Come on. Sorry about this. No, it's not wanting to do it now. Sorry, will that do for them?
If you go to slideshow at your top bar, John, can you move your cursor up to the top? And
slideshow.
Yeah, if you drop on that.
Yep. Okay.
If you open that up, if you click on that, and that will say from current slide, second one, if you click on that.
Done it.
There we go. That's great.
Oh, right. Sorry about that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just look at those eyes. I mean, yes, you can see why he got the job. That's the main street or one of the main streets in Cedar Rapids. I do admire the guy on his bike and those fancy handlebars. It seems to be just a dirt road, and there's his little brick church that I was mentioning. So his Cedar Rapids congregation gathered numbers and influence, growing growing in 1908 to around 300. Tells us that a good friend, the owner of the Cedar Rapids Republican, asked to publish Newton's sermons. And it was so agreed, he says, and the sermon was preached one Sunday, then appeared the next Sunday edition of the Republican. The editor kept the type until the end of the month, and then he put the sermons into pamphlets, and at the end of the year, he bound them into books. And this travelled across the Atlantic and was then reprinted in Britain in the Christian World pulpit. And Cedar Rapids was a strange place, and it had the first purpose-built Masonic library in the world, and sort of it ended up that was where the National Masonic Research Society and its famous magazine, The Builder, started, and Newton was the editor. And it's still there at Phoenix Masonry if you want to go and have a look at it. But anyway, it all goes back to those sermons again, because it was those sermons that caught the attention of the City Temple elders in London. City Temple is the leading nonconformist church in the City of London, and they looked rather more for the right man to fill their pulpit than his actual denomination. That's on the right is one of the previous holders of it. So they invited Newton to come to London for a 1-month trial. The next 5 chapters will take place in just over a month from his arrival in England, and it's a breathless headlong dash because Britain, he's going to see and do Britain and meet all his friends all in just over a month. Not just the places with American historic connections. He went to Stratford-upon-Avon. He shared Masonic experiences with his brothers that he'd previously only known by writing letters as correspondence. And he performed his month's internship at the City Temple. I guess he had the feeling that this might be his only ever visit to Britain. Well, gonna cram everything in no matter what. Perhaps too, on this job right in the center of London. He's come from that little place, Cedar Rapids in Iowa, was going to be beyond him. So he's almost silent on the sermons he preaches in these things, but he really packed stuff in. He sailed from New York on the 20th of June, arrived in England on the 27th, docking at Liverpool, travelling to London by train. And then the next day he was at Freemasons Hall, and on the 30th of June, he went to St. Paul's Cathedral and Westminster Abbey. And then on the 2nd, he visited the City Temple, and the 3rd of July, he was invited to dine to celebrate American Independence Day. But we'll get on to that. So 28th of June, he writes, "From roamings and musings such as these, too many to describe here, I returned to my hotel and met a group of Freemasons who had come to tell me of the arrangements for a reception to be given in my honor on the evening of July the 3rd, following my first Sunday in the City Temple. It was a complete surprise," he says. "Only the vaguest hints of anything of the kind had reached me before arriving in London. And it was just as well, because if I'd known at the scale on which the plans had been made and the guests invited, it would have frightened me out of my wits. Nor did the brethren enlighten me, except to say that it was to be held in Freemasons Hall, Great Queen Street. And that's not the one you can see now, it's the one before that, under the auspices of America Lodge, number 3368. How modest they were, these brothers. What true Masonic secrecy they practiced on me will hereafter be told, albeit in a rather blurred way, because what they led me to think, that it was to be a small group of brethren gathered to greet me, turned out to be one of the most brilliant occasions I have ever witnessed. One of the events of my life I should least like to forget, the memory of which lingers like a fragrance." And there is the picture of the room in which the dinner was held. And he says, "The toast to the visitor of the evening was proposed by Brother Van Duzer of America Lodge. His words were very kind. Indeed, all the references to me were disconcertingly gracious, like flowers delivered to the wrong address. Alas, my speech was a rather poor affair. I was so taken aback by the beauty and surprise of it all, but I did manage to stammer out my thanks and give some account of the spirit and undertakings of Freemasonry in America. And even he had the brother, the Right Honourable Halsey, the Venerable Deputy Grand Master, who he describes as sturdy, stockily built, stooped with age, his whole aspect bespeaking benevolence of character, was most happy in his brief remarks. He says, "As though he was trying, I cannot recapture, much less record the atmosphere of that fraternal hour. Only Freemasonry could have so welcomed a young man in a strange land and made him feel at home and given him the token of regard for work done on behalf of the craft. You know, in the less formal hour of the banquet, I met men I'd long wanted to know. Among them, Brother Robbins, President of the Board of General Purposes, Brother Thorpe of Leicester for the Research Lodge, Brother Sir John Coburn, Brother Songhurst, Brother Churchward, Churchward, he says, who traces Masonry back 1,000,000 years or so. Brother Dudley Wright, editor of the Freemason, and Brother A.E. Waite, to whom I am so deeply in debt as a teacher and friend. So there we are. We think internet's a marvelous innovation, but they didn't do so badly when they just sent it in by mail. But we need to move on because Newton's time was limited, as is mine. So let's skip the next 2 weeks. On July the 17th, on his return by train from visiting
John, I think we've lost you.
On a Masonic outing where they got the River Thames with his friends. And he says, joined a group of Masonic brethren, Waite, Wright, Springett, Calvert, Musgrave, and others, for an outing at the Thames to attend the installation of Brother Stanton as master of Runnymede Lodge at Skindles Hotel in Taplow. We met at Paddington Station, and the train, tiny as a toy alongside our huge and heavy cars, was soon flying through the countryside, so neat and trim and tidy that it looked like a well-kept park. Nothing this side of paradise is more lovely than rural England, in its red brick villages, its vivid green landscape, and a vague haze softening the picture. And that's where they ended up. And he records this in a way which, as an English Mason, I recognize instinctively. He says, as we walked down the lane from the station to the hotel, each carrying a tiny case, holding his Masonic apron and jewels, they folded them in half, those little suitcases. I fell to wondering what it is in Freemasonry that ties men together. Now, there's unique in Freemasonry. As a tie unlike any other, something mystical and tender, which all of us feel, but none of us can analyze. No one cares to analyze it. We sit in lodge together, each knowing exactly what will come next. We meet upon the level and we part upon the square. Old and simple and lovable symbols. And somehow no one knows why. A tie is woven light as air, yet stronger than steel. Very strange and very wonderful. I give it up. Here I'm 5,000 miles from home, yet utterly at home in the fellowship of Freemasonry. In the anteroom, I did not see a pile of little white aprons, as in an American lodge. Indeed, each brother had his own individual apron of fine quality, often exquisitely wrought and highly valued, a treasure to be kept in the family, perhaps. As the master-elect is also a member of Authors' Lodge, a number of men from that famous lodge are in attendance. For in England, a man may belong to as many lodges as he likes, which means an interweaving, interlacing of fellowship, very beautiful to see. It makes me wonder why American Grand Lodges refuse even to allow dual membership. Anyway, he also records the meeting itself. And at one point, he was having a low conversation with the brother next to him. And he says, unfortunately, in his earnestness, his whisper sounded like an oration. And as brethren were looking at us as interrupters, I dropped the subject. Glad to do so because I did not know how to reply. And he says, the business of the day being finished, all apprentices retired and the lodge was open on the second degree. And then describes the installing master then took the chair, and the master-elect was introduced, instructed, and obligated. The fellow crafts then retired, and the lodge was open on the master degree, or grade, as the English call it. All master masons under the rank of past masters then retired. And as we have no such thing as an installed master's degree in American Freemasonry, I felt I had no right to remain and started to retire, whereupon two brothers pulled my coattail and bade me stay, saying, sit tight, stick it. And the worshipful master also motioned to me to remain, so I did. It was a very simple but impressive ceremony, hedging around the master, no doubt suggested by, if not derived from, the master's part, as it's called, of old craft Freemasonry. So indeed, a band of brothers, all through the proceedings, one felt a glow and warmth of friendship shining through the formalities. And he goes on to say that the lodge had been hard hit during the war. Not a few members were away in the service, and alas, some had also made the great sacrifice. And so what was the other side of Skindles like? Because this hotel was right next door to the River Thames, and that's the outdoor dining. But the view from where they were dining was clearly going to be similar. In the background, you can see the River Thames and the bridge behind it. And he goes on to say, after lodge, we assembled for the 4th degree in the dining room of the hotel overlooking the Thames. As we stood for the blessing, I could see wagon loads of wounded men crossing the bridge on their way to a vast hospital beyond. And you can't help but think that he was thinking, what on earth am I doing here? With good food and drink, and the poor guys are going over the bridge in wagons to the hospital. So what was this hospital like? Well, when I looked at it, that's the hospital. The hospital's built by the Canadians, or by the Canadian Red Cross, and this was it was called the Connaught Hospital. The reason for that is the Duke of Connaught, who was the Grand Master of UGLE from 1901 to 1939, between 1911 and 1916 was Governor General of Canada. And his wife was active in the Red Cross and with other charities there and supporting the war effort. The irony was that until her marriage to the Duke, the Duchess was actually Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia. So I guess you just have to change the colour of your allegiances very frequently. And that is typically what a prefabricated ward was like. It's just two rows of beds. But time was running out for Newton, so let's go up north and to take a look there. So there we are, Andrew Somerville MacBride, and there's a copy of his book. We can come back to that later. So the 20th of July, Newton writes, today a letter fluttered down upon my desk from Scotland, inviting me to visit Lodge Progress, number 873 in Glasgow. It was from brother A S MacBride, whose golden little book, Speculative Masonry, is surely one of the classics of the craft, as much for its practical wisdom and scholarly research as for its poetic insight and style. Indeed, his greeting to me was itself one.
O come awa, strange brother of the Westland. Although we hinna meikle gear, you're welcome to our bestman. All Scotia's bens and glens cry out a greeting to the Westman. And honest hearts and friendly horns, but wish you would them testman. O come awa, and be your lucky guestman.
So there you go. That's Gordon's probably done the first reading by a Scottish brother of that poem since 1916. So, lucky indeed, says Newton, is the man who receives such a welcome. He cannot be a stranger. How could anyone resist? Of course, I accept, in order to know the Freemasonry of the North Country. And to see bonny Scotland. So, on the 2nd of August, he sets out by train from London. Up through the flat fields and smoke-clouded cities of the East Midlands I journeyed, a dear old Scotsman, an officer of the city temple, my guide and friend. Almost every town we pass through is linked with some great name. Rugby and Thomas Arnold, Bedford and Bunyan, Lichfield and Dr. Johnson, over the Peak Country into Yorkshire, across the wide moorland district of Cumberland. We entered into the Eden Vale of merry Carlisle. English towns and villages are built of brick. Remember, he's writing this mainly for Americans. I've not seen a wooden house on this island. As soon as we crossed the border into Scotland, everything became stone. Stone houses, stone fences, as in New England, climbing the stony sides of bald-headed hills. Everything stony except the hearts of the people. By the time we arrived at Dumfries in the land of Robert Burns, an old ancestor seemed to rise up in me saying, this is the place I've been telling you about. And so we entered Glasgow in the twilight. Such a reception, he says, such a reception. Never have I seen hospitality more hearty or more happy, or brotherly courtesy more complete in its appointments, or more exquisitely delicate in its details. A delegation met us at the station, and we went at once to the Masonic temple, where Lodge Progress was then in session. As I was led into the lodge, a brother stepped forward and took from beneath the Bible on the altar an American flag. And can you hear the music? It goes on for 3 minutes, so we'll give that a pass. They didn't do that. They stood and they applauded. They cheered him. But if they got the technology, that's what they would have done. And I'm sure Newton would have recorded it like that. At once he says, I felt at home. It seemed very like an American lodge, less formal and more democratic than an English lodge. By the kindness of the worshipful master, in response to the greeting of the brethren, I was allowed to tell of the fame of Lodge Progress in America, owing to the work of brother A S MacBride, whose book, Speculative Freemasonry, had won instant recognition. It was a great joy as well as an honor to praise brother MacBride in his presence. He's sitting at the left of the master, blushing like a child. They in turn had heard of the Masonic Research Society, and it was a pleasure to tell them of our aims and ideals. But on to the next day, because after lunch, which I laughed myself at Scottish Stories, we were off for a spin down to Loch Lomond. It was a crisp, clear day. Even the weatherman, who does not often behave well in Scotland, must have been a Mason, or else been tipped off to be at his best. We had a glimpse of the Clyde along the way, thronged with boats, bordered by vast shipyards full of ships a building. And at Renton, we paused to see the monument to Smollett, and better still, for a visit to the lodge room at Lodge Leven St. John, which of course was MacBride's other lodge, which in some of the dreams of MacBride in respect of the lodge decorations must have been worked out. But he's not going to leave without going to Edinburgh. So on the evening of the 3rd, he arrives in Edinburgh to check in. He says, arrived in Edinburgh late last night. The city was dark and giant searchlights were scanning the sky, darting like shining swords through the clouds, as if stabbing at airy enemies. At the hotel, as I registered, I was promptly arrested for not having King George's pass, he having issued an edict without my knowledge, allowing no alien to go about the country without his permission. The officer was rather stern at first and had the vision of being thrown into jail and turned out of the country. Visions also of headlines in London, the London papers, Minister-elect of City Temple arrested in Scotland. So why was all this? Well, there we are. You can see it. And yes, it actually happened. The 2nd of April 1916, Edinburgh was attacked and bombed by a Zeppelin strike. The target was actually Rosyth Naval Base and the Forth Bridge, but they got lost and bombed Leith instead. But they killed 13 and 20 injured. Naturally, my dear friend and guide was nonplussed. He did not know such a officer asked what business I had in Scotland. And I told him, none at all, except to visit a lodge of Freemasons in Glasgow. As the mention of the word Freemason, his manner changed to gentle courtesy. And I was not only given a pass, but told to go where I pleased and stay as long as I liked. This morning, the officer returned and asked if he might show me the city, saying he had made an engagement for me to meet the Lord Provost, the mayor. Edinburgh is the most beautiful city I've ever seen. Not Princess Street, but Princess Street, he says, was the most graceful street. Nowhere else have I seen such a blend of hills and castles, rocky peaks and lofty spires. In the city of Sir Walter Scott and his monument on Princess Street, designed by a young, untaught artist called Kemp, who died before his dream was realized in stone, and he goes on to describe it. And then in a dash, all in the same day, we returned to the old Waverley Hotel for tea, then to the station to catch a train down the east coast to London. On the train, just passing through the city of York, known and beloved by Masons, I scribble these lines in my diary, regretting I cannot stop off and see the old minster, about which there are so many legends of the craft. And the very next morning, he says, a group of City Temple friends and a delegation of Freemasons gathered to say goodbye at Euston Station as I left for Liverpool to catch my steamer, the SS New York, sailing for America. And there we are, there's his ship. Newton did return in 1917 and stayed till 1919. He took tea with the Prime Minister, had an argument in the Times saying that should use grain to make more bread rather than more beer. But there we are, and he appointed a female minister to help him out at the City Temple, something that in those days was almost unheard of. But that's just the short bit, and it brings us up. So the communication across the Atlantic, and Newton held MacBride in very high esteem and republished his book. And Gordon, I think you've got the URL to go and download a copy of that for anyone who wants it.
Yes,
perhaps you could put that into the next email that you send out. So that, brethren, is a whistle-stop tour of Joseph Fort Newton's whistle-stop tour around Britain. And boy, did he pack it in. Thank you for coming and listening.
Brother John Belton, on behalf of the past Masters, office bearers and members of Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our visitors here this evening, can I thank you for yet again supporting the work that we're doing and making a daily advancement here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi. And it's a privilege to have you here as one of our virtual speakers and not as you normally are face to face with us. Bern, just before we go to the questions for Brother John, I just want to read a couple of extracts from the biography of Brother A S MacBride. I will put the link up to this later on, but I think it gives you an understanding of who the man that Joseph Fort Newton wanted to come so much to meet over in Scotland. This is taken from the short story by Brother John Agnew, a past secretary of Lodge Leaving St John, and it was published in 1966. And the full story can be read on their website, and I'll put a link on the Facebook later on. He starts off, many say that Brother A S MacBride was the greatest figure in Scottish Masonry, but who was the man and what made him this great figure? He was a Justice of the Peace. He was initiated into Lodge Leaving St John, number 170, Renton. He became the Provincial Deputy Grand Master of Dumbartonshire and was a past Master of Lodge Leaving St John and Lodge Progress Glasgow. He was a higher thinker who compiled the MacBride Ritual and author of Speculative Masonry, a literary masterpiece. That book is available to purchase today from the Grand Lodge of Scotland shop, Brian. He was born in December 1843 in Renton. On the 13th of July 1866, MacBride was proposed by Brother John Donald and seconded by Brother Thomas Sutherland as a fit and proper person to become a Mason and member of Lodge Leaving St John, Renton. He was initiated that same evening in the old Black Bull Inn, which was situated within the area now occupied by the playground of Renton School. When Catherine, Andrew's mother, heard he was joining the Masons, she wept bitterly and thought her son was on the straight road to ruin. This being a typical and natural thought of a Highlander, who were more concerned with the straight and narrow path than their lowland Scots cousins. And how many of our mothers thought that when we were young 18-year-olds joining the Masons with our dads, Brian. At the time of his introduction to Masonry, there was scarcely a lodge in Scotland outside of the cities which did not hold its meetings in licensed premises, with Masonic work being rushed through so as to get to the refreshment table as soon as possible. And no doubt, as MacBride himself said, the beauty and truths of Masonry were drowned in a bacchanalian flood. Added that, as a man is an intellectual and moral as well as social being, the social aspect must be kept in place. It was not so kept at that table, and that is why my mother was upset. It goes on to talk about his life as the secretary of the Lodge, Brian, and then about 1870, he talks about the ritual that was enacted in Lodge Leaving St John was based on Preston's Illustrations of Freemasonry, originally published around the middle of the 18th century. This ritual had been copied down in a large notebook, approximately 3/4 of an inch thick, which had been handed down over the generations. It probably came to the hands of Brother MacBride when he first became master in 1867. In this ritual, our illustrious brother found much to criticise, with coarse and vulgar methods creeping in due to the previous owners failing to study the symbolism deeply enough, and them having but small conception of its real beauty and meaning. This criticism of the ritual brought Brother MacBride into conflict with his fellow brothers, but by his tact and patience, he was able to modify and influence those views adverse to his conception, and so gain the respect and admiration of those who initially opposed him. In revising the ritual, Brother MacBride could be found wandering Carman Hill for many an hour, pondering the best way of presenting the ideas it contained, rejecting tautologies and interpolations which had become embedded in it over the ensuing years. MacBride's revised the ritual that would teach what was meant to teach, without ever departing from the spirit and truth of Freemasonry. In revising the ritual, his first care and attention was directed to the office bearers under him, for he quickly realised they had to be leaders, as was fit and proper. We jump forward in the story, Brian, and on the 21st of October 1916, at the height of the Great War, past Master MacBride celebrated 50 years of Masonry. Lodge Progress presented him and his wife with a silver cake and fruit stand and diamond ring. And on the 9th of December 1916, Leaving St John celebrated this momentous occasion, presenting Brother MacBride with solid silver loving cups and to his wife a diamond brooch. A S MacBride, a true son of Renton, sadly passed the Grand Lodge above in December 1923, aged 79. And his loss was a distinct bereavement to his family, the village of his birth and the craft. The author goes on to say, I hope this insight into the life and times of A S MacBride goes some way to demonstrate why he deserves the title of the greatest figure in Scottish Masonry. Brian, I will put the full story and the link to the website of Lodge Leaving St John up on the Facebook page this evening, but I've just taken a 5-minute interlude into what is probably a good half-hour read. So I would encourage you all to read that, and also get a copy of MacBride's Ritual. There are a few lodges that work it, and look at the differences between your own. So John, once again, thank you so much for introducing us to Joseph Fort Newton and the builders, and to A S MacBride. So looking at the questions, Brian, gorgeous Paul Love, I was born in that hospital, true story.
Wow.
Royal Canadian Red Cross in my time. I would welcome a copy of that slide if possible. I'm sure we can get them a copy of that, John.
Yes.
Thank you, Brother John. A very interesting take by an American looking at the UK at that time. Robert Macaulay visited 170 several times. Great lodge, great ritual, but above all, great brethren. What an accolade. Thank you, John. A very interesting presentation. Dear John, that was super, so live and loaded with the warmth of our craft. An interesting fact about the Zeppelin. It bombed the old Royal Infirmary, and there was a brass plaque marking the spot. It just missed the boiler house near the West Gate.
Wow.
And David Weems, another interesting presentation. Brian, there doesn't seem to be any other questions in the chat for John, but I think it was one of those stories, John, that it doesn't lead to the questioning of it because you told it so eloquently and it was about the man's journey. But I'm hopeful that we can have some more discussion about who that man was later on this evening.
Yes, and it was about his oratory and his writing of his prose as well. I mean, he just must have been so good at it to make that leap from Cedar Rapids to the centre of London, and you can sort of see that. And okay, he must polish the prose a little bit. You can sort of feel that as he goes through, but he does record what he feels, and he talks about the people he counselled and people he met when he was out walking in the streets at night. He even records everyone seeing some planes up in the sky, thinking that they were the British planes, and then the shock horror when the bombs started falling. So it's all there.
Yeah, and a very interesting tale about a very interesting brother.
Yeah.
So John, once again, on behalf of everyone here this evening, thank you so much for your efforts this evening, but also thank you for all the other magnificent research that you've done into our beautiful craft over many, many years. Is very much appreciated, and we look forward to more of your writings and your thoughts in the years ahead. Brethren, next week we have a presentation from Brother Mark Easthow. At the time of approaching him, I approached him as a past Cornwallis lecturer, Bern, and to come and speak to us about Freemasonry in South America. At the time, I didn't appreciate that he was actually the current Provincial Grand Master of East and West Kent. So it'll be a great delight to have Brother Mark Easthow with us next week to talk about Freemasonry in South Africa. And I hope that we can have a good welcome for him that evening. Brian, as ever, please continue the discussion on our Facebook pages, and we'll put up information about Joseph Fort Newton and Andrew Somerville MacBride later on this evening. At this point, I'll allow you to unmute yourselves and say your good evenings and thank yous to Brother John Belton. Bern, the floor is yours.
Well done, John, and thank you.
Well done, John. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother John.
Oh,
Enjoyed
John, I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Many thanks,
Well done, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Presentation.
Well done, John. Thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you very much, Brother John.
Thank you.
Skindles Hotel still exists today.
Thank you so much.
I used it many a time when I was living down there.
Well, yes, it does. It's been taken over by one of the Roux family.
That's correct. I believe so. Aye.
So it's now an expensive Michelin-starred place.
It was an expensive place when I used to go there in the 70s as well.
Yes, but you look at that dining picture right down on the Thames, and
Yeah.
you can see it would be a perfect place to have Michelin food, wouldn't it?
Oh, definitely. A fantastic building as well.
Yeah, it almost got pulled down. It was sort of empty for years, apparently.
It did for a while, I believe, and then it got revamped. The Riviera on the other side of the bridge, other side of the river, was doing such good business that someone thought, oh, I'm going to cash in here.
Yeah.
So does that mean we won't get pie and beans in at the Harmony if we went there?
I very much doubt you get pie and
But
beans.
You might. It'd probably cost you 50 quid.
A space of pie and beans.
Thank you, Brother John.
Wokingham Shed's about the only place you get pie and beans down there.
I'll be pie mashing liquor.
It's not the same pies, Nobby.
No, I know it ain't.
At least you'd get some stars there.
This is a thank you session, Brian. We'll get the banter once we stop recording. So if you can just please continue with your thank yous.
John, that was a wonderful tale you spun for us.
It's not my tale, it's Fort Newton's tale. Most of the words I spoke were Fort Newton's words. I just don't have the Texas accent, but I didn't have the Glaswegian one either. I chickened out on that.
Is that Gordon? Oh dear. Oh dear.
Thank you, Gordon.
Yes,
Thank
I
you
am
very
available
much,
for
Brother John. That
voiceover
was an
work.
excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Brother John. Yes, excellent, John. Thanks, John.
Excellent.
Good night, boys. Good night.
Thanks, John.
Excellent. Good
Very
night.
interesting. Thank you.
Okay, Brian, I'll
Thank
give
you,
you
John. A
5.
wonderful tale.
Thanks, Lord.
Thank you, John. Hope to see you again soon.
Yes.
I'll give you 4, Brian.
Thanks, Gordon. All the best.
Cheers, Bob.
Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon, and all the best, brother, and stay safe.
Cheers, Brian.
Same to yourself.
Thanks again, Gordon, and thank you very much,
Yes,
John.
thank you. Cheers.
Catch you next week, Gordon.
And Brother John.
Yes, Robert.
Cheers,
And
Gordon.
to
Thanks
Brian.
very much.
And 1, Brian. John Belton, thank you once again. It's been a great pleasure having you here at the Lodge Hove of Karachi.